society will just come apart at the seams if we can't do that, if we can't determine what is real and what isn't. This is the Futurists exclusive live event for the I was going to say the 12th anniversary, Rob, but the 12-month anniversary, the 1-year anniversary. Joining me are the hosts of the Futurists, Rob Tercek, Brian Solis, Katie King. Welcome to the Futurists, all.
Yes, welcome to the future.
Indeed. We said we'd see you in the future, and here we are. So I wanted to just let's start off with giving a bit of highlights. Let me ask you guys first. Who's your favorite guest that we've had on the show this year?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough question. Like, how many guests have we had, Brad?
Well, one guest per week. We've only had, so it must be at least 50 guests.
Right, fair enough. Okay, that's good. Man, we've had so many talented people with so many different varied backgrounds. I'm thinking that I like Tanya Hardy. I thought she was great. The NASA mission controller who did the flight to Mars. I thought that was a really fun episode. I also got a real kick out of talking to Julian Bleeker because he has such a fun practice. His design practice is so super interesting. But gosh, I mean, I could go on all day.
Well, some of the highlights for me, like some of the big guests, obviously, the sci-fi guys. So Kevin J. Anderson, David Brin are always fun.
David Brin.
We just recorded another show with David Brin and another show with Kevin J. Anderson, and they're both just incredible thinkers.
David Brin's a trip, man.
Yeah.
On that recording that we did for an upcoming episode with Kevin J. Anderson was actually my favorite. That was, in fact, it was so much my favorite that it was happening in real time where I was just lulled into silence. I could just listen to him talk all day, and he's just incredibly electric. He just exudes this positive energy of which we need more of that in our lives.
Yeah,
he's a great example of. Like, you look at him, he's had something like 60 New York Times bestsellers, which is incredible.
Oh.
You look at someone like Gary Vaynerchuk, right? He's got 5 or 6 New York Times bestsellers, and you think he's incredibly successful. Kevin J. Anderson turns out a new New York Times bestseller every year, right? He was saying on the interview in the 90s, he was producing 12 books a year. Which, as an author, I can't even comprehend that. Right?
That's not writing. I was thinking about if I did 12 articles in a year, that would be an achievement, let alone books.
Yeah. But not only that, but how, in the first episode, this is one of the things we learned, is that how he does his books is he goes on a hike and he has a dictaphone and he records the book into the dictaphone, and then his assistant, transcribes it later.
Right on.
Which, again, I can't even imagine doing that. Especially when he's got all these plot lines and so forth, that particularly for writing in the Dune universe, keeping all these plot lines in his head so that he can do that. It's just extraordinary.
Let's turn it back to the Futurists. For the folks who are just joining the room, you are watching the first anniversary live stream of the Futurist show. I'm Rob Tercek, my co-host Brett King, and our guest hosts Brian Solis and Katie King, aka Miss Metaverse. Hey, Miss Metaverse, how's that tagline working out for you these days? Metaverse is not quite as cool. A little of the shine has come off the Metaverse.
Listen, I was using the Metaverse decades ago, before anyone knew what the Metaverse even was. First of all, I think the Metaverse needs to be reclaimed because the Metaverse originally meant multiple realities.
We're cruising right into that.
Yeah.
Apple's about to drop this mixed reality headset. They've been tantalizing us with it for years. Now it's finally coming. So who knows? Don't rule out the Metaverse. It's just around the corner.
As Stokel's been talking about Metaverse 2.0, it's going to be a 2.0, a 3.0. So keep evolving for sure.
Right on.
And also let's keep in mind that Neuralink just got approval for human trials. So we're we'll see some kind of other metaverse as well, something that we might plug into. I think they called it the Matrix back in the day.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, that's been one of the themes, as Brett was just saying a minute ago. One of the themes of this show is that science fiction is what inspires every single person that we talk to. We always do this little Q&A with our guests, and we always ask them what story or what science fiction inspired you, and everyone's got a story. Like, they don't hesitate. They all know their first science fiction movie or their first science fiction show or film that they were inspired by. And it's really tightly woven into, even like, hardcore scientists and researchers, they've all been inspired by some narrative. So for part of our show, we always interview science fiction authors. Brett and I enjoy that. The other half, we've also been talking to people who aren't just thinking about the future, but people are making the future. And this is my favorite thing. I love those people. Our definition for this show's purposes, our definition of the term futurist is not just somebody who writes about the future, but somebody that's actually actively working towards building their version of the future. And that's a key message for the people who are watching. It's like, look, the future is something that you can own. It's something that you can manage, you can manipulate, you can drive towards, you can shape it. It's up to you. Of course, if you don't do any of those things, you're going to be living in a future that somebody else invented.
Someone else defines, yeah.
Yeah. And,
one of the great illustrations that we had of futurist thinking on the show was the episode with Thomas Frey.
Yeah, that guy's great.
Yes.
Yeah, because he said, and I was just listening to the clip. I was trying to upload the clip for the stream today, but he demonstrated futurist thinking in real time.
Yeah.
So how he did that, he used two examples. One was a space hotel and the other was a robot dog, right? And in both instances, he sort of played out how, you can think like a futurist. So, okay, someone announces they're going to have a space hotel. So then you have he called it a series of firsts that you have associated with that. Who's going to be the first guest of the space hotel? Who's going to cook the first meal for the space hotel? Who are going to be the first entertainers that are on the space? Like, he started to extrapolate this, and with the robot dog, he was like, all right, so what does a dog do? Well, you could say it protects you, it provides companionship. So how is a robot dog going to protect you? Well, it has to be able to sense danger. So how do we code that in? So that sort of demonstration of futurist thinking was sort of a unique highlight, I think, from this season as well.
It was a real flex. He's awesome. That guy's a pro. He's been doing this a while, and it shows. One of the things we noticed is that every person we interview has a methodology for thinking about the future. And that's part of what we're trying to impart to the audience, is the idea that, thinking about the future isn't just an idle fantasy. It's a habit. It's a skill you can build. What's interesting is nobody has the same methodology. So for every person we've interviewed, they have their own unique methodology that they've arrived at. Some are much more fluent in it and aware of it, and others, it's kind of an unconscious thing. What Brett just described is Thomas Frey. That's a great episode to listen to if you want to see futurist thinking demonstrated live. But we've had a number of folks that we would consider professional futurists demonstrate how they do it, how they go about doing it. I mentioned Julian Bleecker a moment ago, and he's the person who created the manual of design fiction. And his style is to actually make like a brochure. In fact, he's made like fake IKEA brochures for items from the future. I mean, he goes all the way towards building them. So he like realizes the future in a physical way. It's a super fun episode. Fun to talk to him about that. David Matten, who writes the New World, Same Humans newsletter. He's a very thoughtful fellow from the UK. And he shared his methodology with us, which was, he covers tech trends and sociological trends and where they intersect. And he said, look, technology changes constantly, and not all trends last. Some trends come and go. But he said there's one constant. The one constant is human needs. And so if you take a new technology trend or some new capability and you ask yourself, how does this satisfy a human need? Does it do a better job than what we currently have? And he said, if that's the case, then you can predict pretty reasonably that's going to be very successful. I thought that was kind of a cool approach. And another person who uses that humanistic approach is Rohit Talwar. In fact, he spent quite a bit of time talking about how to think and how to communicate with people about their concerns about the future. And we joke around a lot about, things like the AI apocalypse on the show. That's always kind of a lively source of gags for us. But the truth is, a lot of people don't find the future a fun thing to think about because it's scary to them.
Yeah.
And in Rohit's practice, he has to work with corporations where they're very resistant to change, and he has a very human-centered focus. In fact, I think that's what we called that show, the Human-Centered Future. And he talks about nonviolent communication, which is a practice that you can do, and he applies that in corporate communications and when he's in offices.
That was also a theme of John Hagel's interview,
That's right.
wasn't it?
Yeah,
right? John
Hagel
was
is the
talking
guy-
about how to deal with the fear of the future.
He's a friend of David Brin's. He's the fellow who introduced the concept of digital transformation. You know, that term, we kind of take it for granted now, but he actually coined the term back in the 90s. And in the 90s was an absolute powerhouse. His books like Net Gain were really influential. And he's pivoted his entire consulting practice now to one thing, which is helping companies deal with fear, emotional resistance to change. He's decided that's the most high value thing he can do. So that was a fun episode with John Hagel. It is a little weird that like half the people we interview know each other. It makes me feel like we're creating a club. You know, maybe that's why it's called the Futurist Network. You know, we're creating a network of people.
It feels like that, doesn't it? Yeah.
It is a network. I mean, that's how Brett and I met. We were all part of one big community, really. I mean, I was on Brett's show back in, 2015, you know, back on Breaking Banks. And
now
you
look
know,
at us.
I mean, and another thing too, I mean, there's so many wonderful people in the Futurist community that I've met that have been on the show. I mean, Harry Clore, you know, good friend of all of ours. And, you know, he's doing some awesome work on robot avatars, which was a show, the robot avatar show. There's also Gerd Leonhard. He's been super inspirational. Yeah. Gerd's great. And Ross Dawson too. Ross Dawson, you know, I remember his Futurist list. I mean, what a great list.
That's what we went to that list to look at who we should invite on the show, actually. So shout out to Ross.
Shout out to Ross.
For sure.
Yeah. The other one I liked was Aubrey de Grey. I thought it was a big get to get Aubrey, you know, futurist specializing in life extension and longevity. But one of the really cool things that I learned from Aubrey's episode was, you know, I've always maintained, you know, when I've written about longevity that, you know, it's most likely going to end up as a treatment for the rich. And he disabused us of that concept because he said, you know, the most expensive part of the healthcare system, you know, in countries like the United States today is caring for the elderly. So if you could give them longevity treatments to improve their, you know, long-term quality of health, then you reduce the overall healthcare cost to the system, which it's the first time I thought about it like that. So, you know, there were some really amazing gems like that in you know, like over and over, you know, speaking to these people with incredible, you know, just nuggets.
Yeah, Aubrey's an interesting fellow. I've been interested in his work for more than 10 years. I would guess about 15 years now. And I've met him a couple of times. But what's fun about doing a show like this is you get a chance to get to know people on a personal level. He's such an approachable and friendly person. He loves doing outreach because what he's talking about, frankly, most people are pretty resistant to the notion that you can extend human longevity or solve the problem of aging. And so he has to be out there in a very personal way to persuade people to open up about that. We've had quite a few folks talk about health and longevity on the show. In addition to Aubrey de Grey, we had Dr. Daniel Kraft. This is the episode I got the most positive feedback from listeners on. If folks aren't familiar with Daniel Kraft, he runs the MedTech conference in San Diego, and he's part of Singularity University. And he's a cancer researcher and an absolute aficionado for future tech gear. So if you ever want to know about wearables or quantify itself, he is your go-to expert on the subject. And he gave us a whirlwind tour of all the advances that are happening right now on medical frontiers. We also talked to Tony Hunter, who is a food futurist, which I didn't even know.
I thought that was pretty cool, actually.
That's cool.
And very charming fellow. But he pointed out that food security is like a number one strategic initiative for most countries, right? To make sure that their food is, their access to food is something they can rely on. And, of course, in the background, we've got this war going on in the Ukraine, and that's shut down a lot of the shipping out of the Black Sea. And a lot of the world's grain goes that way. And so there was some real serious context to Tony Hunter's otherwise very lively and fun conversation. And then we had a more serious conversation with Roger Holtzberg, who I know as a world builder and a former Disney Imagineer, But he had a brush with cancer himself, and now has pivoted his entire practice towards technology that heals. So it's kind of a fun spectrum that you see. And one of the things we're noticing on the show is that the people who think about the future, when they see an opportunity, they're not afraid to reinvent themselves and go for it. We've already talked about a couple of those today, but that seems to be a constant theme. If you're interested in the future, you're probably pretty interested in going for it. One thing I noticed, even Brett, you've kind of turned me on to is, while everybody has a different methodology, every futurist has an attitude as well. And they may have different methodologies, but they share the same attitude. I remember when I first started talking to Brett about doing the show, he said, I can't wait to live in that future. And I was like so charmed by that idea. But it turns out every person we've interviewed on the show, they share that kind of sunny philosophy. Like, we haven't talked to anybody who is an apocalyptic thinker or a doom and gloom person. I mean, even David Brin, who can go pretty far in either direction, in any direction, candidly, he's pretty versatile. But even he, I remember famously at the end of the first show, he was really excited because he said, we do have a chance. We have a chance for survival. It's kind of like his closing line on the show.
Yeah. No, I think most of the guests we've had are fairly optimistic, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a real theme. I think if you think about the future, you're an optimist.
Absolutely.
Well, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to be in any conversation, whether it's thinking about the future or it's thinking about innovation or it's thinking about creating net new value. It's hard not to be an optimist and be successful on those fronts. And everyone, to quote Steve Jobs, everyone's just looking to make their dent in the universe. And it's usually driven by solving a problem or creating an opportunity. And going back, Rob, to your point earlier about needs, there are known needs and there are unknown needs. And I think that the magic there of chasing what you know you don't know, and what you don't know you don't know is magical.
You're making my head explode.
Sorry.
No, that is
Donald
the game.
Rumsfeld quote.
That's the discipline, right?
We did also have a futurist from Woking come on the show to talk about the future of payments, and he's popped in to say hello. So, Dave Birch, let's welcome from Woking as one of the guests on the show. It's nice to have you.
Hi guys.
How
you
cool
doing,
is
Dave?
this?
Hey.
Yeah, good.
What's life like in Woking? Are you in the future yet?
Today it's particularly sunny, so it's very good actually. But I tuned in because that point you're making about optimism, where that really applies at the moment, I'm just curious what you guys think about this, is around AI, because it's quite exciting. We're at some kind of cusp. Putting AI in the hands of millions of people rather than just a few corporations, clearly is going to have some knock-on effects, and I can certainly think of a tsunami of misinformation as being one of the impacts. But it's very dystopian. Like all the commentary we see about this rapid increase in AI, it's become very dystopian. And so kind of what I want to ask you guys about is...
Yeah, but that's the press, Dave. And we get that stuff in the press. But the press these days is all about sensationalism and hitting the disgust button or the anger button. They push these red emotions because that's what gets people to click. On our show, what Brett was just saying is that consistently what we're getting is people who are very sunny and optimistic. And we're not talking to random strangers. We've interviewed some of the top AI researchers. And that includes people like Roman Yampolsky, who's an AI safety researcher, very pragmatic, great interview. If you want to hear about someone who's dealing with the real issues, the safety issues, and he's not alarmist in any way. Ben Goertzel spoke about it. Dr. Philip Alveda talked about a world where we're constantly monitored, which sounds creepy and Orwellian. And I pressed him on the subject, but he actually responded in a very positive and sunny, optimistic way. So I think the trend that we're seeing is that people that are working on these issues, like literally building the AIs, they're not as concerned. They're pretty pragmatic about it. So I would say don't believe the hype. We're trying to pop the hype bubble.
Yeah, actually, David Brin made an interesting point when we had him on the first one of the early episodes, talking about dystopian versus utopian science fiction movies, and he made the point that it's cheaper to produce dystopian sci-fi movies than it is utopian sci-fi movies. So that's why we get so many dystopian future, because you can get burned out buildings. It's a lot easier to find than futuristic interfaces with tons of CGI, right?
Well, in a happy world full of abundance is a pretty boring world, candidly, for a movie. The movies need conflict in order to make the movie go. So yeah, that's a good point.
But we in the quickfire lightning rounds, we always ask that question: what sort of future do you hope for? Or what science fiction is representative of the future you hope for? And so many, talked about the Star Trek future as being what they hope for, which is a testimony to Gene Roddenberry for sure. But
a future with no government and no apparent government and no apparent politics. That's what they're talking about.
No money, right?
Or as we talked about the other day on the David Brin show, Tim Stanley Robinson in Ministry of the Future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And apparently they're going to name, David shared that they're thinking about naming a department, the Ministry of the Future. That'd be pretty cool. What an honor for a sci-fi writer. We have a question from Mark Sylvester. Hi, Mark. Good.
Hey, Mark.
To see you here. His question is, in 3 to 5 planning cycles, what are things that leaders should be considering that are not obvious? So the non-obvious
3 to 5 year planning cycles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the most immediate thing I can think of in terms of AI is we are very soon going to start to see the world divided into 2 groups of people. Those who are powered by AI, or corporations powered by AI, and those who are arguing why the traditional way of business is better, right? Which is the story of everything, the internet disruption and so forth. So if you're in a planning cycle next 3 to 5 years, you have to think about how to augment yourself and your business with AI. I'd say that. But maybe Katie, Brian, what are your thoughts?
One of the things that bothers me about AI right now is that we don't think like futurists or scenario planners or optimists. We do inherently bring in that dystopian response, which is in times of uncertainty, cut. And that is essentially what we started to see with IBM and their announcement, the British Telecom recently, and essentially AI being used to replace people is sort of that natural tendency of where executives want to go or leaders want to go. Whereas if you reframe the question as to how could these roles be augmented with AI to net gain or net produce growth in 5, 7, 10x in today's output, what yields would that give to the business? And would it actually drive greater profitability and net new revenue versus reduced costs? And streamlined, and you kind of get into this.
Build on that, Brian, because that's a really good point. Which is, companies are not just cutting costs; they're cutting people. Right? We're seeing hundreds of thousands of people laid off in the tech sector, and now the media business is laying people off, and it's kind of rippling through the economy. Maybe that's something companies need to do right now. Maybe they overhired before the pandemic. But one thing they're not investing in heavily is employee education, workforce training. And my sense is if I were running a business right now, I would be asking myself, how can AI augment every person on my team? Not just a handful of people, but rather, I think the benefit of something like ChatGPT, a generative text thing, is that it brings mediocre writers up a notch. It's not so much good writers need to use it, but for a lot of people aren't good writers. Half of them are below average, of course. And it can be really powerful to help people communicate better. It can manage, there's a lot of places it can streamline process. It doesn't necessarily need to lead to cuts, but I think companies right now are not thinking so much about how to enhance employees. They're trying to think about how to replace employees. That might not be the right thought process.
Rob, you're exactly right. This is exactly the time for optimistic futurism, because essentially what we're being challenged with as a human race is how do we live with artificial intelligence? And it's a choice. We either let it happen to us, right? And that's leaving it to leaders, decision makers, to think the way that they always have, and take new technology to automate, scale, make things more efficient, and or it's an opportunity to imagine what the future looks like, what the role of business in society looks like, and then the role AI can play in augmenting our capacity. We get to invent that. We get to create that.
So we're all pretty optimistic. Why are people so pessimistic? I mean, like, the story is always AI.
Well, but here's the thing that we've often disagreed on the show, Rob, which is the impact of AI in respect to techno unemployment. Right. Well, we've had debates on the show in this respect. I've always maintained that this is going to be a game changer, that certainly in the mid 2030s, we're going to see large scale technology unemployment. And for exactly this reason is that as AI, we start to trust AI and use it in place of humans in so many areas, you either have to retrain people en masse. And then you've got the Andrew Yang question about the 5 million truck drivers in the United States. How many of them really want to be coders? And so this is, I think
they don't have to be coders, right? The way you're framing the question answers itself, right? I mean, not to quibble, but look, here's what I'm seeing happening. As companies shed employees, in the past, you would get hired by another company, right? If you got great tech skills and you're getting fired by a tech company, you're probably getting hired by another company. But at a time when they're all laying people off, what we're starting to see is a proliferation of startup businesses. I spoke to a fellow the other day that runs an incubator or an accelerator, I should say, and he's trying to automate the process of capital allocation because he said there's going to be such a flood, such an abundance of AI-funded startup companies that only have a handful of people in them, but they'll be able to do a great deal. So he's trying to speed up the process of capital allocation. To me, that's very forward thinking, right? To Mark Sylvester's question about what should we be looking at in the future, the problem that fellow is trying to solve is if there's an abundance of new companies, then how can I match them with investors much faster with much less friction, where the startups don't have to fly across the country to talk to investors and so forth. He's going to eliminate that friction and thereby speed up or accelerate the process. That seems a pretty future-focused idea.
We do have a question from Johan Diedrichs. He said, what are thoughts on open source personal private AI protecting individuals from exploitative AI from corporations?
I like that he also added the optimistic line because I certainly can read the contrary.
So I would say Johan's right on the money in the sense that where the momentum is shifted in the last 2 months is towards open source AI. And that has a lot to do with the fact that Meta's Llama LLM slipped into the public domain inadvertently, so it's now become open source. I don't think they intended it to be that way. But as a result, there's been a proliferation of now independent teams, including individuals, running that large language model and innovating with it. And what we're starting to see now is literally hundreds of new product launches every week. For a while, I was trying to keep up with it. And I found it's just a treadmill. It's a mug's game to try to keep up with all the new innovation in AI, because there could be 100 new products released in a single day. Like, you simply can't evaluate every single one of them. And now this whole newsletter is devoted to it. So on the one hand, open source is accelerating innovation, but I think also it's developing tools for individuals so that we'll be able to select our own tool set. And I actually think this is going to be a responsibility everybody has. Start to evaluate your own workflow and then identify the right tools to help you automate where you need it.
Well, when we look at AI in particular, the EU is sort of starting to lead regulation in this respect. EU and China. But there is a debate around privacy and whether privacy is eliminated with artificial intelligence. In fact, that was always Jack Ma's position, right? Is that privacy wouldn't exist in the future in the same way we have it today. But maybe we'll ask Dave to join us back here for a second. Dave, how does AI affect privacy considerations?
I mean, I think that point is actually a very strong one. And you were talking earlier on about literature and how, somehow that gives us a better framework for thinking about the future. And I think one of the interesting things about the kind of, Neil Stephenson, William Gibson view of things is that it may well be that we don't have any privacy in the real world anymore. And that actually accelerates our push to live, work, and play kind of in the metaverse, because in the metaverse, that will be the place where you actually have privacy because of cryptography and zero knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption, all these kind of things. walking down the street, you have no privacy. There's cameras everywhere, and everyone's got a phone. Every single person with a phone is recording you and putting it on Facebook and all this kind of thing. So the metaverse, in many ways, will become a more attractive place to actually interact with people, and that may accelerate the push. So, people think of the metaverse very much in terms of the interface. They think of, Fortnite or Call of Duty or something. They think
but
of
it's also how your digital twin will be set up, right?
The point is, the metaverse isn't just about like how it looks and the VR and it's also like the infrastructure of it. And I think there are some reasons for thinking that there are aspects of the infrastructure of the metaverse will actually be more appealing to people, not just simple things like money and stuff like that. But
Dave, if I could build on that, it's not just the metaverse. We're actually talking about the next iteration of the web itself is far more attractive in that regard because of what we're seeing with Web3 technologies, where we're actually going to give the user more control. We're going to give the user control of their data. That data becomes part of their wallet, which becomes part of their identity, of which they take with them. It's in fact, most organizations, whether that's a business or whether that's an e-tailer, whether anybody who transacts, they're not ready for this world. In fact, it's going to completely disrupt their mechanisms for revenue, employee relations. We have to now start thinking about this world of where people like you and me are in control of those experiences, and that'll happen well before the metaverse.
We're used to the internet because and lots of people say this same thing. The internet, in retrospect, it was a bad idea to build it without an identity layer. It was a bad idea to build it without a payments layer. The metaverse won't be like that. But the implications of that, I think you were saying, what are the non-obvious implications? Like right now, I go to my Facebook feed, I go to Instagram or whatever. I see a picture of Winston Churchill playing table tennis with Henry VIII, and it looks completely realistic, and I have no idea whether it's real or not. And because I'm a moron, I don't understand any history or like you can show people anything and they'll think it's true.
You show people what they want to believe, right? So this is what's happening, at least here in the United States, is our news media is turning into something that's like the confirmation bias channel, where they show you the news stories that you want to see. And deepfakes are great at that, right? So deepfakes build an alternate version of the world that we can buy into if it flatters our prejudices or flatters our bias.
But if
we've got to start tagging content with AI generated fake. Right. We've got there is society will just come apart at the seams if we can't do that. If we can't determine what is real and what isn't. Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurists podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific, and the FinTech 5. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network, and Next Gen Banker. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
I want to talk about the topics that we didn't cover in the show. So when we talk to our guest experts like Dave, very frequently the same topics keep coming up. Lately, it's all AI. Unfortunately, the world is drunk on AI right now, so it's the only topic at the bar. But there's a couple of topics that keep coming up again and again and again. Technological unemployment. I see Steve Troyer posted a question about that. This question of whether or not more jobs are created versus jobs that are lost. Historically, always more jobs have been created. I see no reason for that to change.
Well, we've debated that. We've never had a technology that can impact every industry and every type of human process-based job simultaneously all at once. So this is unprecedented. So,
yeah, but as I mentioned a minute ago, it seems to me you're not going to get another job when you get laid off by your big corporation. You're going to start a company.
Well, UBI is, UBI is the
God.
way to create tons of entrepreneurs, right?
UBI is a way to punt the problem created by the private sector over to government, and everybody complains about government. And by the way, they're doing the same thing with climate change right now. Private sector creates the problem, punt the problem over to the government. Now the government,
and then they don't let government fix it because
exactly.
they control lobbying groups and therefore control policy.
Brett, this is one topic we're never going to agree on. So I am so sorry. We're not going to go back down the rabbit hole. Although I promise you, we'll do a show one day. We'll do a death match on the UBI.
Well, I'm happy to entertain your delusion.
Can I just challenge this thing about the jobs thing? I've got the numbers in front of me, but I don't want to bore people with the numbers. I just want to make a couple of general points because I just want to challenge that narrative a little bit. So first of all, I've got some figures in front of me for the investment in industrial robots in the UK, France, and Germany. And forget the exact numbers. For sake of argument, in the UK, there's 5 robots per 10,000 people who work in car manufacturing. And in Germany, it's 2,000. Germany has way, way more robots in car manufacturing than we do. And the consequence has been that the number of people employed in the German car industry has gone up significantly because of this investment. Because the robots make the industry more productive, German cars are more attractive, people buy more of them. If your cars are attractive and people are buying them, then you need more people to service them and you need more people to work in advertising and marketing. So there's very interesting, if you look at the actual numbers, they've gone up. But my favorite number, and I'd love your comment on this, my favorite number is that in the UK, where productivity is appalling compared to France and Germany and places like this, in developed countries, a useful benchmark for this pathway to the future is car washes. Car washes are a very, very good example. So in an advanced country like Germany, the number of automated car washes has gone up. People, round at the gas station, you drive your car into the car wash, get it washed.
Dave, where are you going, man?
In the UK,
we're live, Dave.
In the UK, it's halved. So the UK has actually been replacing robots with people.
Well, so this is interesting. The
there's
stats
a place
on robots,
with human labor is cheaper than a robot, right? Particularly like a robot, right? Not automation or software.
Well,
we are going to have to deal with that at some point, right?
Replace everything. And I'm just saying, if you look at the numbers, it's not true. Like in some places, increasing robots increases employment.
Sure.
In other places, we've been chucking out robots and replacing them with people.
All right,
I posted a thing the other day. I got a bunch of static from people on social media, which was a picture that said, it was a meme that said, wait a minute, I thought the robots were going to be doing all the grunt work. How is it that the AIs are now generating poetry and painting pictures? We're still doing the grunt work. And it's true. If you think about, a carpenter, a plumber, someone who works in construction, those jobs aren't going to get replaced by robots anytime soon. The jobs that are going to get replaced now are going to be bookkeeping jobs, copywriters, social media marketers, even some level of web development. These jobs, I think, have a very short shelf life ahead of them. But presumably some of those folks are going to pivot, start to use AI, and they'll be super productive, and thereby they'll be able to continue to do those jobs if they want to. If we can, please, let's steer it away from AI and robotics, only because that topic just keeps coming up like a bad penny every time we talk about it. One of the things that doesn't seem to come up on the show, which I find fascinating, is demographics, because demographics is one of the few ways we can be certain about the future. And that's because the births are already here. So we know what's going to happen. For instance, we know that the region of sub-Saharan Africa is going to add people faster than any other region on the planet. And yet very few of the people who we've interviewed have much to say about Africa as a
Which
continent.
leads us to the conclusion that India and Nigeria are going to be, two of the top 3 countries in the world in the 2050s because of the demographic changes.
Yeah, I think that there's a great deal of likelihood that those places are going to emerge as centers of innovation because they have to, right? Because they're going to. They need to create jobs more than any other place in the world. Meanwhile, here in the United States, we're following a trend that the rest of the Northern Hemisphere seems to be following, which is that we're not reproducing. So, the United States, if we did not have immigration, and we're certainly making it difficult to have immigration here now, if we did not have immigration, the U.S. population would not be growing. And of course, if it doesn't grow, there goes Social Security, there goes the whole retirement scheme. So it's actually important for everybody to grow the population. Europe in general is aging out. Russia aging out. China has passed peak population. They're aging out. The whole, Japan famously, right? And South Korea has the lowest reproduction rate of any country on the planet right now. So all the growth in the future in population is going to come from the southern hemisphere. The other demographic trend we never cover on the show, which I would love to get into, is the depopulation of rural environments. This is happening across the U.S. and Asia and Europe as people move to cities, as we urbanize. Kind of the flip side of that is that fewer people and fewer young people and fewer working people are in the countryside. That's one reason why those places are so deeply conservative. So I was just reading yesterday from someone who said that there is you can correlate the deepening conservatism and aging out and hollowing out of the countryside.
Right.
And relate that to the fact that those people don't come to the city much and they don't see the incredible diversity and the incredible transformation that's happening or the challenges of managing these complex urban environments.
I think Japan illustrates your points extremely well, actually. I think it's a very well-made point, because in Japan you do have that depopulation.
Yeah.
And you also have a massive investment in robotics rather than immigration. So they deal with their...
How many robots do you think are on the planet right now, guys?
I don't know, a couple of million, I suppose.
The numbers are 60 million.
60 million.
60 million. But yeah, 60 million robots. Now, this includes industrial robots, but it now includes drones, autonomous drones. It will include autonomous vehicles in the future. So the estimates are that sometime in the 2040s, the number of robots will exceed the number of humans on the planet. So be kind to robots, right? That's my.
If they're listening,
they're all
listening right now.
Too. Mm-hmm. But the point about the Japanese use of it, which I think is very inventive in ways, is, we think about the robot as the thing that's making the car or writing our advertising text for us. But for example, one of the things that fascinates me in Japan is the use of robots to support disabled people. Yeah. So you have people.
Yeah, well, that's an important part of, if you look at aged care. Japan doesn't have the capability to provide. There's not enough nurses. They don't have the immigration policy.
Well, they're making artificial wombs. Did you see that? I mean, they're talking about using that in Japan.
All right, Rob.
Hang on. The reason Japan doesn't have enough people to do healthcare and to care for elderly people is because of immigration. Let's be clear. There's an artificial constraint on the number. There's no.
No, I've just said that. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Immigration.
They're using robots.
And China's going to have the same problem, right? China's not going to allow massive immigration from the Philippines to bring in nurses, for example. And the US has a shortage of nursing stuff. So we need robotics to care for the aged. That would be the conclusion. Right?
Yeah, my sense is in healthcare and elder care in particular, a lot of people get displaced. If they get displaced by AI, those are going to be jobs for humans. And there'll be an abundance of people available to do that kind of work. Okay, so here's another thing that came up, which Brett and I have talked about a couple of times. We've interviewed a couple futurists on the show who refuse to put dates on their forecasts. And
I don't get that.
This puzzled me, and I'm going to start calling people out on it when we do the show in the future. Because what good is a forecast if you don't put a date on it? It's like saying, oh yeah, someday we're going to have vacation on Mars. Well, that doesn't help me plan my vacation this year or next year. So like, what good is that? A prediction without a date?
I'm going to have my first vacation on Mars in 2048.
Okay, there you go.
There you go. And it's going to be a two-year vacation, because that's how the transition works. I'm hoping Katie comes, but
I think it's cowardly not to put a date on a forecast. It's not just a useless forecast, because no one can. It's not actionable by anyone if you don't have a date on it. I actually think it's the futurist is dodging a professional responsibility if they don't put a date on their forecast.
I agree. Because what is futurism? If not, we've talked about this on the show. Futurism is super forecasting, right? The further, so you
one of our
talk
first shows was with Regina Joseph, who's a super forecaster. Yeah.
Right. So you can talk about forecasts, 3 to 5 years, but you're getting out to 20, 30 years, you're talking about super forecasting, right? That's the analogy. And so you have to be talking timeframes to be making it relevant in terms of where this fits into society and what the challenges will be with this. I think you must have, you can have a range. You can have a range of possibilities or a range of dates, but
we have a comment here from Jonathan Altfred. It says, I predict futurists will start putting dates on forecasts in 2027. Very well done. Thank you.
What's the most interesting forecast we've had on the show? Thinking out loud.
Ouch, that's let me think. I have to go back through.
The one thing that was interesting to me was one of the early guests you brought on, Rob, which was Andrew Hessel.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
This thing around synthetic biology came up actually a few times, and he was quoted a few times by other futurists, including by the food futurist. I forgot his name now, but Tony.
Yeah, synthetic biology is one of those futuristic things where the sun never fully rises. We've been hearing about synthetic biology for 15 years. By all rights, it ought to be a gigantic business. And for those who aren't familiar with it, the idea of synthetic biology is it's a step beyond biotech, or a step beyond bioengineering, where you actually are reprogramming the cell. You're using the cell's internal chemistry to program it like a computer. To produce different things. And if you think about the phenomenal generative energy of biology on this planet, all life in some form and all energy in some form is coming from the sun. And we're converting that energy into various life forms. There's a whole long chain, basically extending that energy as it circulates around the planet. That's a very powerful generative force, and it should be able to help us generate new forms of energy or new forms of power, new forms of food, new forms of medicine, even materials. They're talking about programming cells to grow a house, like a tree. Now, that's a vision. We're pretty far from that vision. We have seen one spectacular application of synthetic biology, which was the COVID-19 vaccines. So those vaccines would not be possible if it weren't for 10 years of investment in synthetic biology. But that topic keeps coming up. It's one of those future-focused topics that I'm interested in. It's a bit like the metaverse. It's like the thing we keep talking about. We expect it to happen someday. So my takeaway on that is that sometimes the future takes a long time to arrive. So that's one of the reasons why people are hesitant to put a date on their forecasts. But
the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
That's true. It's not fully formed. But but that's a good point, right? There was a time where, if you wanted to see the future of mobile, you just had to jump on a plane and go to Tokyo, and you could get a great snapshot of what was coming around the world in a year or two.
Rob, can I add something real quick? One of the things that you had brought up actually in a conversation we had was the interesting factors of when you bring futurists together and you cross the streams, like in Ghostbusters. And for example, when you and Brett were talking earlier about India and Nigeria, I was thinking about other climate futurists who say by the time that happens, those two areas will also be uninhabitable because of climate transformation. And so then we start to look at the world through these different lenses to bring them together. It also allows for different conversations to have about what do we do in these scenarios.
Yeah, there's going to be mass migrations of people. We're already seeing that now. I mean, it's already in progress. There's, climate refugees. What was the number? Something like 20 million?
No, so last year was 65 million, and most of that was because of Pakistan. Right. We're going to have the chief, the head of communications, Vineo, incidentally, Brian, coming on the show in the future. But have you guys? So Katie and I ask everyone this question these days. But have you watched Extrapolations yet?
The Apple TV series.
If you want to see how a fairly realistic version of how climate change, the use of AI, the role of corporations in setting policy, eco-refugees, air quality, water quality, food quality, all of those things potentially play out with the mix of climate change and AI. It's a really, really interesting thought exercise and does align quite closely with where both Katie and I think the world might end up potentially. And it's a warning for us because, we're just not doing enough to prepare for the future. And that's, again, something that I think, Rob, that, we've seen come up time and time again in conversations we've had with people is that, there's not a lot of, we argue about what's going to happen in the future. We debate if AI is going to take jobs. We don't prepare for the fact that AI is going to change the way we work, right? We know that food scarcity is going to be a problem. We're not preparing for, solving that, right?
It's a topic that comes up a lot. For instance, when we spoke to Stefan Lindstrom from Finland's Ministry of the Future, effectively, he's their Minister of Technology. Right. He pointed out to us that the difficulty the EU has in trying to regulate things like artificial intelligence, even trying to define it. So there's a defect in a democratic society. If you're running an autocracy, it's pretty easy. You can just decree a diktat and then everybody has to conform. And we see that happening in China and elsewhere. But in Western democracies, the defect is that they have to wait for the problem to arrive. They're incapable of preemptively dealing with a problem, even if we're pretty sure it's going to occur. There are just too many. Ways to stop the process. There's too many checks in the system, and it's just too easy to stop someone. And so here's the way I would put that: the future doesn't have a lobbyist, right? Existing industry has a lobbyist. Existing groups have lobbyists. Interests are very powerful in government, but unfortunately, nobody's representing the future in Congress.
Yeah.
Congress barely knows what's going on, period. I mean, they don't even understand Facebook. I mean, it's just like.
But this raises a really good point: is how are we going to deal with getting really future-proof regulation in place? Like, I know, for example, looking at the banking sector, the regulatory infrastructure we have is already not fit for purpose for the way, and this is why we're starting to see bank failures in the United States. We need to completely restructure that. But to try and get state and federal regulators to, allow someone else to take over their perceived responsibilities is just like, it takes acts of Congress and so forth. It's so difficult to even conceptualize. But, regulation around AI is a great example is, we don't have people in charge that have the skills to sort of think about this.
I mean, that's partly because Republicans in Congress have killed the technology office. They used to have an excellent group that advised them. But that was a political decision because they don't want to hear about it. They want to know about it. We got a question from Jimmy Gilberti. Hi, Jimmy. Good to see you here. The question is topics on energy to support all the innovation. So energy does come up from time to time, certainly when we talk about autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, which is a topic that we've covered a couple of times, Brad Templeton, for instance. And we had Ramez Nam, who is an expert on energy, future energy. And by the way, it's a great episode if you haven't listened to it.
Ramez is great. Yeah.
Ramez is cool. He's like the cool futurist. And now he's a venture capitalist. So now he's actually putting money where his mouth is, which, you can't get more futuristic than that. And he's very calm about our energy future. He's extraordinarily optimistic. I would say I'm more anxious about the energy in the future than he is.
Yeah, he was quite optimistic.
Yeah, it was a good show. The topic that just came up the other day in a recent recording was about recharging long haul trucks. Like the big 18-wheeler trucks. A great candidate for an electric vehicle. It makes sense to electrify them. Diesel is nasty. But if you had 10 of those trucks trying to recharge their batteries, it would pull down as much power as a small village or a town. And we just simply don't have the generative capacity right now to support that. We don't have the generation where the trucks are. So that was going to require a rethinking of our energy grids. And that'll probably be a big project. It's a little weird to me that we just passed this multi-billion-dollar or trillion-dollar infrastructure bill in the United States, and it didn't have anything in it about smart grid or future grid.
No.
What a miss.
No smart contracts. Yeah.
It's sad. I mean, you see it all the time. You got one side that's like, we'll just build more nuclear, or you have another side that's, so many people complaining about EVs. Not everyone can drive an electric vehicle because of all the mining and all this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of complicated sides to it.
We need to get a nuclear futurist on the show. Actually,
yeah, we do.
Talk about next generation nuclear tech, like the thorium reactors, tokamak reactors, stuff like that.
For the
Yes.
people who are watching the live stream, Dave Birch is peppering us with very funny forecasts. I'm going to read a few of them now. This is from Dave. The U.S. will break up just like the Soviet Union did. A new religion will start on TikTok. I'm with him on that. I think it is a new religion. And social media will be regulated like smoking. Good work, Dave. We should all be doing a little future forecasting here, I think.
All right.
I agree with all three of those, especially the first one.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
likelihood, I mean, if you look at things now in the United States, particularly with what's happening in Florida and so forth, it's hard to imagine at time when the United States could be united in purpose again, unless it's maybe a war with China. But who wants that to bring the US people together? But almost every depiction of the future when it comes to the United States depicts the United States as breaking apart.
Yeah.
Ideologically.
Like California becoming two parts,
Yeah,
Northern California, Southern.
Friends,
Don't get me started.
That's the history of the United States. We've been through much, much worse in this country, and it's not just the Civil War that I'm referring to. So it's a pretty resilient place. I mean, that said, right now we seem to have opt-in reality, like where you can choose your reality. That's problematic for a democracy. If you can't agree on what the facts are, if you can't agree on what the situation actually is, then it's going to be pretty hard to talk about a remedy or a fix for it.
But I think autonomous cities are going to be.
Go ahead.
No worries. Autonomous cities are going to be a big part of this as well. I mean, I could definitely see if he's not already working on it. I think he mentioned it once, but Elon Musk mentioned possibly creating an independent corporate city somewhere, maybe in Texas. I don't know.
Well, he wants to do it as a trial for what the smart city on Mars is going to look like, which makes sense, right?
Elon Musk.
Well, I can't put my
this
faith.
Is not his best week, I would say.
I can't put my faith
Our
in
daughter
someone
calls him Alien Musk, but anyway,
who's perpetuating our human potential by distorting facts and truths. And this is certainly not where we can go. It's like Rob, to your point, the confirmation bias channel, the CBC, your favorite channel on TV today, only confirms what you already believe and is accelerating a race to the bottom of human potential. It's actually something that we could use more discussion around.
Well, we've only got a few minutes before the top of the hour. It is designed as an hour show. So I thought what we could do now is talk about what's coming up in the second season.
Yeah.
Of the Futurists. We hope to have for you at least 3 guests that are in the works right now. The first is Peter Diamandis, who we are looking at scheduling right now. Hopefully that comes off.
Abundance.
Yep. Dr.
Yes.
Robert Zubrin. From the Mars Society. He's got a new book out on the case for nuclear, actually, case for nukes. So we'll see if we can get Dr. Zubrin on. And we just asked David Brin to introduce us to the leading science fiction writer, eco-climate science fiction writer today, which is none other than Kim Stanley Robinson. So fingers crossed, this would be a major get for us. So there's a bit of a glimpse of some of the guests coming up in the second season. Who else do you guys want to see on the show this year?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's so many. It's hard to say. I like to see Elon Musk because I know he's controversial. I know, but listen, some people love him, some people don't, Yeah.
Great.
But I think that would be the one.
Jesus,
I'd like to see
airtime.
I'd like to see James Gunn on the show.
Okay. Great. Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm working on a number of guests right now, but it's a little too soon for me to say who will be joining us. One fellow I want to have on soon is Michael Margolis, who's more of a philosophical thinker. We've had some success with people who think about storytelling as a way to define ourselves. And that might seem odd for a show about futurists, but if you think about what scenario planning really is, when you posit a scenario about the future, you're telling a story. You're really, anytime you're projecting something past 5 years, you're no longer extrapolating from existing trends. You're telling a good story. And Michael thinks deeply about that. So we'll be having him on the show soon as well.
Fantastic.
I'd like to get Peter Schwartz on the show.
Oh, for sure.
He'd be
We got to
great,
do that,
yeah.
Brian. That's a great suggestion. He is the original scenario planner. Hey, for the folks who are listening, thank you very kindly for your support. Thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for telling your friends about it. It means an enormous amount to us. So you can see this is a labor of love. Brett came to me with the idea more than a year ago, and we were kicking it around. We were like, let's just do it. Let's reclaim that term futurists. Let's inject a little new meaning into it. And
This is a debate I had with Mike Walsh, actually, whether futurist was a positive term or a negative term. But we got to get him on too, actually.
We should actually, yeah, for sure. And so thank you everybody who's been listening and supporting us along the way. That's been really great. We've gotten great feedback, suggestions, comments, and questions. All of that means so much to us. So thank you all for that. Katie, Brian, it's great to have you join the club. Our growing club of futurists, our hardy band of futurists, charting a path into the future. So thank you all very much for joining us here. It's top of the hour, so it's probably time.
So there remains only one thing to say, which is we will see you
in the
future.
All right. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody. Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.